In the stillness of her deepest self, a woman quietly wonders, who am I when I strip away the expectations, the roles, and the stories I've been told to live? Not the titles, not the roles, not the smiles worn to please, nor the silences learned to survive. Beneath all of that, what remains? Carl Jung believed that within every human being lies a deep yearning to become whole. For women, this yearning often carries a unique weight. For centuries, they've been shaped, molded by stories, not their own. Stories written by culture, by religion, by patriarchy, tales that told them how to behave, how to be loved, how to belong. And slowly, layer by layer, they forgot themselves. But Jung didn't simply offer a theory. He offered a way home, a path he called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, beyond conditioning, beyond expectation. For the unforgettable woman, this isn't rebellion. It's a return to the self that was buried, not broken, hidden, not erased. She doesn't become unforgettable by trying to be seen. She becomes unforgettable the moment she sees herself. This journey starts not in the world, but in the psyche, in that sacred space where the conscious and unconscious meet. It's a quiet excavation. You begin to peel away the layers you thought were you, the perfectionism, the self-doubt, the craving for approval, and underneath, you find a woman who was never meant to shrink. She's powerful, but not in the way the world measures power. Her power isn't loud. It doesn't demand. It simply is rooted in truth, anchored in self-awareness. Jung taught that each of us wears a persona, a mask we create to function in society. For women, that mask has often been sculpted by others' comfort. Be soft, but not too emotional. Be confident, but not intimidating. Be nurturing, but don't want too much. So many women live behind that mask for so long. They forget it's even a mask, but something begins to stir when she stops performing and starts listening to the voice that says, you were never meant to be ordinary. The voice that doesn't ask for permission to be real. That voice is the self, and it's calling her back. This return is not glamorous. It's not curated for social media. It's raw. It's intimate. Sometimes it's lonely, because as she begins to shift, the world around her doesn't always celebrate it. People liked her better when she was agreeable, when she didn't challenge the narrative, when she stayed in the box. But boxes are for the dead, and she's choosing to live. The unforgettable woman is not created through external admiration. She is born through internal recognition. The moment she chooses her truth over her reputation, her soul over her safety, that's the moment she begins to shine. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about removing what was never hers to begin with. The beliefs, the guilt, the shame, the inherited idea that she must earn her worth through sacrifice. She doesn't fight the system head-on. She simply exits it. She stops asking others to define her, and instead defines herself. And in doing so, something radical happens. Her energy changes. She no longer moves from lack or fear. She moves from wholeness, and people feel that. They might not understand it. They might resist it, but they will never forget it, because the woman who is no longer at war with herself becomes magnetic, not because she's trying to impress, but because she finally stopped pretending. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the soul's call to individuation, to become undivided, to integrate all that. We are not just the light, but the shadow, not just the parts others praise, but the ones we hide. And when a woman answers that call, when she dares to remember herself, she becomes unforgettable, not because the world says so, but because, finally, she does. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she begins to question the patterns. Why do I keep ending up in the same relationships? Why do I feel invisible, even when I try so hard to be seen? Why does it seem like I'm constantly shrinking just to be accepted? Carl Jung would offer this answer. It is your shadow speaking. The shadow is not evil. It is not weakness. It is simply the part of you that you've been taught to hide the parts that felt too much, too intense, too emotional, or too ambitious for the world around you. And so, like many women, you buried it. But what you repress doesn't disappear. It waits. It becomes shapeshifter and mirror. It whispers through the people you attract, the wounds you can't seem to heal, the cycles you repeat. The shadow becomes your teacher, but only if you're willing to look. Jung taught that the unconscious does not forget. It continues to speak through your dreams, your triggers, your fears. The more you avoid it, the louder it gets, not to punish you, but to wake you. You think you're being rejected by others, but often you're rejecting yourself first. When a woman refuses to confront her shadow, she abandons herself every time she minimizes her pain to keep the peace. Every time she ignores intuition just to stay loved. Every time she chooses being chosen over being whole. And here's the truth. Many fear to say out loud. Sometimes the reason you feel unseen is because you have gone missing from your own life. But there is a way back. The unforgettable woman isn't unforgettable because she's flawless. She's unforgettable because she faced the fire within. She stopped running from her wounds and started asking them what they were here to teach. She didn't numb the pain. She translated it. This doesn't happen in a single moment. It's a process, slow, sacred, often uncomfortable. But it is in this confrontation with the shadow that real transformation begins. You stop blaming others for your lack of fulfillment. You stop begging for crumbs of validation. You stop wondering if you're too much, and instead begin to ask, why did I ever believe that my fullness was a problem? Jung spoke of balance, of integrating the masculine and feminine within. The anima, the inner feminine, isn't about softness alone. It is about deep instinct, fierce knowing, emotional wisdom. And when a woman embraces this inner power without apology, she becomes impossible to ignore. But society doesn't always welcome that. Women who are emotionally sovereign, spiritually anchored, unapologetically whole, they disrupt systems, not through rebellion, but through presence. And yet, it's not about being strong in the way we're often taught. It's not about never crying, never needing, never breaking. It's about knowing who you are, even when you break. The woman who has met her shadow doesn't fear failure. She understands that her darkness holds truth, that her jealousy, her anger, her insecurity, they all carry messages. They are not signs of weakness. They are signposts toward healing. You've seen this in your life. The moment you stop abandoning your own needs, the moment you speak your truth instead of swallowing it, people may pull away. But that is not your loss. That is your clarity. Jung said the unconscious repeats what it wants us to understand. So when life keeps bringing the same lessons, it's not because you're broken. It's because your soul is committed to your evolution. And once you understand that, you begin to rise not as someone who needs to prove her worth, but as someone who has reclaimed it. This is the woman who no longer chases love. She attracts resonance. She no longer fears being alone. She fears abandoning herself. And most of all, she no longer hides her shadow. She integrates it. She listens to it. She learns from it. Because she knows now, what she once believed made her unworthy is actually the source of her deepest power. There comes a turning point, a moment when a woman who has walked through her shadow, who has confronted her silence, finally says, no more. No more shrinking. No more pleasing at the expense of peace. No more self-abandonment disguised as kindness. This is the moment she begins to set boundaries, not as a defense mechanism, but as a declaration of worth. Carl Jung taught that true transformation happens not by controlling the external world, but by shifting the internal frequency, and boundaries are how you protect that shift. They are energetic signals to yourself and to others. I am no longer available for what drains my truth, and in this simple but radical act, everything changes. Because when a woman stops negotiating her value, the world around her adjusts. Some relationships fall away not because she's become too much, but because she's finally become herself, and that self no longer fits into cages built for compliance. The woman who has integrated her shadow walks with a different rhythm. She speaks from a place that doesn't seek validation. She gives, but not to be loved. She says no without guilt, without apology, and people feel it. Jung often spoke of the psyche as a field of energy, shaped by unconscious patterns and symbolic language. What we don't heal, we repeat. What we don't own, we project. But when we begin to live in alignment with our essence, that energetic field begins to shift. You stop attracting what reflects your insecurity. You begin to attract what mirrors your integration, because the woman who respects herself draws in people who do the same, not because she demands it, but because her energy makes it non-negotiable. This isn't arrogance, it's coherence. When your inner world is congruent, your outer world realigns, and that's when magnetism begins, not the surface-level charm, not the temporary allure of appearance, but the deep, rooted presence of someone who knows herself. She enters a room and doesn't need to perform. Her presence already speaks. She doesn't need to dominate. Her alignment resonates, and this is the part society doesn't teach, that true feminine power isn't about controlling others, but about becoming so in tune with your essence that control becomes unnecessary. Because power isn't something you grasp for, it's something you embody. And embodiment begins with boundaries. A woman who sets boundaries isn't cold. She's clear. She isn't harsh. She's honest. And in her clarity, she becomes radiant. You may have noticed it. The moment you stop over-explaining, the moment you say no and don't second-guess it, the moment you honor your intuition without needing proof, you feel lighter, stronger, more you. That's not coincidence. That's frequency. Jung believed that the unconscious seeks wholeness, and boundaries are part of that wholeness. They aren't walls that isolate. They are invitations to meet you where you truly are, not where you feel obligated to be. When you begin living like this, you no longer fear being misunderstood. You no longer fear disappointing others, because your priority is no longer being digestible. Your priority is being authentic, and that authenticity, it's unforgettable. Because in a world where so many dilute themselves to be accepted, the woman who chooses truth becomes a signal, a lighthouse, a mirror. She doesn't just protect her energy, she transmits it, and those meant to rise with her, they feel it. They always do. There is a quiet grief that comes with awakening, not the kind that announces itself with tears, but the silent ache of seeing clearly for the first time and realizing who cannot walk with you anymore. Carl Jung called individuation a lonely journey, not because it isolates you from the world, but because it asks you to release everything that once defined your place in it. And for women, that letting go can feel like betrayal. Betraying family expectations, betraying friendships built on mutual self-denial, betraying a version of themselves that once felt safe, even if suffocating. But it is not betrayal, it is truth. Claiming itself, you begin to realize that belonging is not worth the cost of abandoning yourself. That acceptance is hollow when it requires the dimming of your light. That being understood by everyone often means you've said nothing that truly matters. And so, a choice arises. Do I stay where it's familiar, or do I follow the voice inside me, even if it leads me away from what I've known? This is the threshold, the sacred edge of transformation. The unforgettable woman chooses the voice, even if it trembles, even if it leads her into silence, because she knows the life she longs for cannot be built with tools that kept her small. And so, she walks, not with arrogance, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She walks away from relationships that echo her wounds, from jobs that demand her performance, but not her presence, from spaces that applaud her silence and punish her truth. And yes, it's terrifying, because the ego wants certainty, it wants approval, it wants applause, but the soul wants freedom, and freedom always asks for something in return. The courage to walk alone. This is not loneliness. This is sacred solitude, the space where masks fall away, and you begin to hear the sound of your own soul. Clearly, maybe for the first time, Jung understood that the greatest threat to authenticity was not fear itself, but the unconscious agreements we make to avoid it. Agreements like, if I stay small, I'll be loved, or if I don't speak up, I'll be safe. But the unforgettable woman breaks those agreements. She rewrites them. If I speak my truth, I may lose people, but I will find myself. If I set boundaries, I may disappoint others, but I will no longer betray myself. And in that space of sacred aloneness, something extraordinary happens. She begins to feel her own energy again, not filtered through others' expectations, not edited for consumption, but raw and real. She remembers that she is more than what she provides, more than how she is perceived, more than the stories told about her. She is who she knows herself to be. This is where true strength is born, not in the ability to carry others, but in the willingness to carry your own truth, even when no one claps for it, even when they say you've changed, even when they say you've become too much. Because when you walk alone, what you leave behind is often noise, and what you step into is resonance. You begin to attract not from fear, but from frequency. You choose relationships not based on history, but on alignment. You build a life not from obligation, but from inner conviction. This is the woman who can no longer be controlled, not because she resists power, but because she has claimed her own. She is unforgettable, not because she is louder, but because she is real, not because she dominates a room, but because her presence makes pretending impossible. And even if her path narrows, even if her circle shrinks, what remains is sacred, because it is chosen, it is true, and it is hers. Letting go doesn't always feel like liberation. At first, it feels like loss. The people you thought would always understand no longer recognize you. The roles you once played now feel foreign on your skin. Even your voice. Your true voice sounds unfamiliar when you finally use it. This is the void. Carl Jung knew this space well. He called it the negredo, the black stage, the moment when the old self dissolves and the new one has yet to take form. It is the darkness before transformation, the womb of your rebirth. Most people run from this place. It's too empty, too uncertain. But the unforgettable woman does something rare. She stays, not because she enjoys the discomfort, but because she understands what it means. She knows this emptiness is not punishment. It is preparation, because to become whole, to become truly herself, she must clear the space within. And that means releasing everything that no longer aligns with her becoming. The relationship that demanded she stay small, the friendship that only survived when she didn't speak her truth, the version of herself that sought validation like oxygen, gone. And in the silence left behind, something begins to stir. It's faint at first, just a flicker, but it grows. A vision of a life that feels real, a sense of self that doesn't shift with the room she's in, a knowing not intellectual, but cellular, that she is building something sacred. Jung said that transformation is not about improvement, but about integration, and that integration can only happen when the false layers fall away. So she sits with the void. She lets it undo her. She lets it unravel the lies she lived. She lets it hollow out the noise so that her truth has space to rise. And slowly, the grief softens. The stillness becomes grounding. And from this nothingness, something is born. Clarity, intuition, power not loud, not sharp, but rooted and unwavering. She begins to see that the things she once chased attention, approval, certainty were distractions. What she needed wasn't out there. It was in here, always. This is when the unforgettable woman begins to feel her own energy change, not just in her mind, but in her body. The way she speaks, the way she walks, the way she listens. She no longer rushes to fill silences. She no longer explains away her boundaries. She no longer lowers her frequency to maintain harmony. And people notice. They can't always name what's different, but they feel it, because she is no longer seeking. She is embodying. This is the paradox Jung pointed to. The more you release, the more whole you become. The more you surrender control, the more power you access. And this power doesn't demand attention. It draws it, not because it wants to be seen, but because it's impossible to ignore someone who has made peace with the void. Someone who is no longer afraid to lose, no longer afraid to start again, no longer afraid to be misunderstood or even left behind. Because now, she understands. Anything that crumbles in the face of her truth was never meant to stay. And in its absence, what arises is real. This is the alchemy of feminine power. Not in force, not in dominance, but in the quiet, steady reclamation of the self. So if you find yourself in the void, uncertain, alone, stripped of everything familiar, know this: you are not lost. You are in the in-between. And from this space, you are becoming unforgettable, not because others say so, but because you are finally living in alignment with the one voice that never lied to you, your own. Something subtle happens when a woman stops fighting herself. The energy she used to spend on fitting in, on being agreeable, on second-guessing her Worth returns to her, and in its place, there is stillness, not emptiness, not numbness, but peace. A peace so deep it becomes magnetic. Carl Jung understood this state well, not as passivity, but as the powerful alignment of the inner and outer world. He taught that the psyche is a system, and when all parts begin to work in harmony, light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, voice and silence, a new presence emerges. A woman who is no longer performing, a woman who is no longer proving, a woman who simply is. This is not the kind of peace the world offers. It is not contingent on circumstances or on others approving. This is peace rooted in truth. It cannot be borrowed. It cannot be imitated. It must be earned through the sacred labor of self-return. And it changes everything. She no longer walks into a room hoping to be liked. She walks in tuned into her own frequency. She no longer needs to speak to be heard because her silence carries weight. Her eyes hold clarity. Her body carries conviction. Her presence disorients those who are still pretending, because the woman who has reclaimed her peace does not negotiate with chaos. She doesn't match energy, she sets the tone. And while the world often confuses intensity with power, she embodies a deeper force, groundedness, emotional sovereignty, self-respect that doesn't need to be declared out loud. She doesn't posture, she doesn't chase, she attracts because she is aligned. And this is the paradox. The quieter she becomes, the louder her impact. People listen differently, not because she raises her voice, but because her words come from stillness, not reaction. She's no longer speaking to be right or to win. She speaks only when it matters, and when she does, it lands. Because the unforgettable woman knows this truth. When your energy is clear, your presence does the work for you. She is no longer addicted to being understood. She is committed to being real. That's the shift. She has stopped outsourcing her value, stopped curating herself for consumption, stopped sacrificing inner harmony to maintain outer approval. And the people who once relied on her compliance, they begin to fall away, not because she pushed them, but because her truth was no longer convenient. And still, she doesn't falter, because she knows that true belonging only comes after self-belonging, that peace with others is impossible until she is at peace with herself. This is what Jung meant by integration, not perfection, not sainthood, but the wholeness that comes when a woman stops disowning parts of her being, when she lets go of shame and welcomes every aspect of who she is. Tender, fierce, rational, wild. In that integration, there is no performance, only presence, and that presence, it's unforgettable. Not because it demands attention, but because it disrupts illusion. Not because it impresses, but because it liberates. She walks differently now. Not faster, not louder, but with intent, with awareness, with reverence for herself and her path. And people can feel it, even those who don't understand it, respect it, even those who fear it, remember it. Because a woman at peace with herself is a mirror the world cannot look away from. And that's not because she has something to prove. It's because she has nothing left to hide. There's a moment quiet and almost unremarkable when a woman no longer waits to be chosen. She doesn't need a spotlight. She doesn't need a title. She doesn't need a seat at the table she once begged to be seen at. Because she has chosen herself. Carl Jung called individuation the most important process of a human life. The movement from collective identity to individual truth. For the unforgettable woman, this journey doesn't end with applause. It ends with recognition, not the kind that comes from others, but the kind that settles in your bones. A knowing that you are enough, not in theory, not as affirmation, but as reality. She no longer measures her worth by comparison, no longer edits herself to be digestible, no longer treats her soul like something to be bargained with. Instead, she walks through the world as someone who knows where she stands. Even if she's standing alone, this is not confidence in the way we're taught to understand it. It's not about charisma or achievement or image. It's about coherence. She is finally living in alignment with who she really is, and because of that, she radiates something unteachable. She doesn't try to be unforgettable. She just refuses to be anything but herself. And that refusal, quiet, firm, graceful, changes everything. The people in her life shift. Her career begins to reflect her truth. not her fear. Her relationships become mutual, not transactional, because she's no longer showing up to be approved. She's showing up to be honest, and in doing so, she gives others permission to do the same. Jung knew that when we live from our essence, we impact the collective. Our personal wholeness becomes a ripple of awakening. And this is what makes the unforgettable woman a force, not because she pushes others to change, but because her existence challenges the lie that they must remain asleep. She becomes a quiet revolution, not by speaking louder, but by living deeper. She is the woman who has learned to walk away without bitterness, to say no without explaining, to love without losing herself. And when people meet her, they feel something shift. They don't just hear her words. They feel her alignment. They don't just see her confidence. They recognize her peace, because she has nothing left to prove and everything left to live. This is the kind of power that doesn't come from rising above others. It comes from finally coming home to yourself. And in that home, there is dignity, not pride, not perfection, but quiet, unwavering self-recognition. She has made peace with both her brilliance and her brokenness. She has stopped negotiating with fear. She has remembered who she was before the world told her to forget. And now, she is free, not because life became easier, but because she became clearer. So when she walks into a room, people remember her not for what she wears, or says, or achieves, but for how she exists, because she exists fully, without apology, without disguise, without asking for permission. And that, in a world of masks, is unforgettable.